Welcome to the Psych Central Show, where each episode presents an in-depth look at issues from the field of psychology and mental health, with host Gabe Howard and co-host Vincent M. Wales.
Hello everyone and welcome to this week's episode of the Psych Central Show podcast. My name is Gabe Howard and with me as always is Vincent M. Wales. And today Vince and I will be talking with Brett Francis. Brett's mission is to educate individuals and society at large about mental health and why having mental health issues or a family member with them is a lot more normal than people think. Brett, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you guys having me on.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
Definitely glad to have you. Brett, my first question is this. How did this become your mission? What happened in your life to push you in this direction?
Yeah, well, it was a long road, I'll tell you that for sure. When I was 6 years old, I was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome and severe ADHD. And then, of course, 17, I was re-diagnosed with the same, but in addition, anxiety, OCD, and panic disorder. Now, that doesn't mean that I only had anxiety when I was 17. Since I can remember, I've been struggling with anxiety and panic and mental health, mood regulation, all those kinds of things. And I think a lot of it was from being bullied when I was in high school. I was bullied very badly. I was shoved in lockers every day. And that really was the big start of it. You know, when I was 7 years old, my parents said, just tell everybody that you've got Tourette syndrome. Well, as you guys know, mental health is miseducated or maybe not known a lot about sometimes, or it's a taboo topic, which, you know, we're all working at bringing some more awareness to it, you know, and making it less taboo and more of normal conversation. But Tourette's is still one of those things that is very misunderstood. And so people would think, oh, she's going to be swearing like the girl on the movies or like this person in the movies. And so I got really ridiculed and bullied for my Tourette syndrome for a very long time, shoved in lockers every day. And I was, when I was 15 years old, I was raped for my first time. And then, you know, through that, I did a lot of substance abuse, and I really was starting to fail in school after my rape. And so I had a lot of mercy passing because the teachers felt sorry that I was being bullied. And at this time, you know, there wasn't a lot of education about not only Tourette syndrome, but mental illness. The parents did the best that they could, but it was still a really, really big struggle for me. And so when I turned 18 years old, very shortly after I turned 18, I actually got pregnant unexpectedly with my high school sweetheart. And then at 19, I had a miscarriage at about 4 months. And then I hit rock bottom. And through all of this, after my rape, after some traumatic events in my life, and then again after my miscarriage, was the last attempt that I had on my own life to take my own life. And so I've struggled through my whole life. And still to this very day, I have bad days. And I just want to my mission has become that because I want to bring awareness to mental health and help people understand that it is normal. It's just like having diabetes, or you get a broken leg, so you get it casted, so you have mental illness, you try medication, you know, really working at normalizing that, because, you know, I would have done anything for somebody to be able to relate to me and say, hey, that doesn't make you a screw up. Like I felt a lot of my life. I felt very broken for a very big portion of my life. And that's why I do what I do, is not only because I'm passionate about it, but I just, you know, I love every minute of it. And that's become my life's mission.
I love that. And I also love the way that Vin asked the question. It's like, we see that you're a mental health advocate. What happened to you? And yeah. I say that to be a little bit funny, but it really is true. I've noticed that people in the mental health advocacy space are either people like me, I live with bipolar disorder, or people like you with Tourette syndrome and you know, anxiety and everything that we just learned about you. Vin, of course, has persistent depressive disorder. And it really seems like either you or somebody that you love suffers from a mental illness in order to really occupy this space. And I'm hoping that someday I will walk up to somebody and say, oh my God, you're a mental illness advocate. Why? And they'll say, because mental illness is serious. And I'll be like, well, but you have it, right? No. A loved one? No, mental illness is serious. We need to help out. And that will just be like a great day. A great day.
It would.
You know, I really look forward to that day too, just to hear, yeah, I'm passionate about it. You know, you hear kids talk about being an astronaut, a geologist, you know, a tradesperson, or a veterinarian, or you know, 6 foot tall blonde model. That's what I want to be when I grow up still, by the way, guys.
I like
you know,
it.
And where is I'm passionate about mental illness and I want to stop the stigma just because I can, you know, instead of being an astronaut or whatever. You know, I look forward to that day as well.
So earlier you mentioned Tourette syndrome and how it's so misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you pointed out, most people just think of it as the stereotypical swearing without any kind of restraint sort of thing. But it takes many other forms. Can you share some of those with our audience?
So the swearing is actually called coprolalia, and it only happens to 4 to 7% of people with Tourette syndrome. So Tourette syndrome is divided into a couple of different things. You have motor tics, and then you have verbal tics. And then out of those, each of those, there's simple, and then there's complex tics. Simple ones would be like hand jerk, sniffing, snorting, blinking your eyes, lip smacking, things like that. Those are really a lot of the common simple ones. And then now when we get into the complex ones, that can be anything from, like, I've had days where my tics are so bad that I feel like I need to echo sounds on an action movie or something. Or some people, feel the need to bark like a dog or repeat themselves saying something, and they have to say it in just the right way and just the tone of voice. That one I actually know, like I said, from, the sound effects in movies, or you have to scream or things like that. So, it's a lot of different uncontrollable. And sometimes I'm like, wow, I didn't know that my Tourette's would want me to do that. Like you just have these new tics and they're ever changing. So when I was younger, I did have quite a bit of prominent verbal tics, and I was yelling. I never swore, but in the middle of my sentences, my sentences were like 100 different volumes. I'd be from screaming at the top of my lungs to like hardly mumbling. I had this one where I had to breathe all of my air out, and I had to go and breathe it all out to the point where I had nothing left in my lungs. But as you age and mature into it, you can either grow out of it or you can continue on with it. And it's fairly mild because it's worse in your hormonal years when you're going through puberty and all that stuff. But, as you mature into it, your tics kind of get solidified. There's a few solid ones, and then there's a few ones that are like moving. And so it's sometimes, every 6 months I'll be surprised and I'll be like, oh, this one's fun, so it's changing. And so sometimes it's new, but it's also frustrating sometimes because you're like, oh, I just got used to the one that I was, the new one that I had 6 months ago, now I have another tic. So, and sometimes you go 3 years and you don't have a new one.
Very interesting.
I did not know that either. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
You are the host of the Not Broken radio show, which is heard on many different radio stations throughout America. Can you tell us, why did you name it Not Broken?
Well, it actually followed my book. So my book's called Not Broken, and that's where I came up with Not Broken, because I spent a large portion of my life feeling very broken and going into psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors' appointments, and even, people in the general population with the stigma. I felt like a screw up and like I couldn't do anything right. And I'm sure that you guys have felt like that before with your mental illness.
Many times.
That's not a good feeling to have, like you don't fit anywhere. And so the book and the Not Broken name was inspired by feeling like that for a lot of my life. So I say, whenever I talk about mental health, my slogan is Not Broken, because people with mental health challenges and disabilities are not broken. And they don't need to be, stereotypically fixed. It doesn't mean that they won't need to learn to manage, or it doesn't mean that they don't need help, but they're not broken. We don't look at a person with diabetes as broken. We look at them as somebody who needs to manage that disease. And I think we should look at mental illness the same.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much. I love that. I love that.
Thank you.
Let's talk about how mental health and physical health are linked. It's something that Gabe and I have brought up several times over the course of our show, but I don't think it's ever been spoken about enough. Do you have any input on that?
I'll share a personal story. Recently, on my spouse's side, his nephew, he's 15 years old, and he was hearing voices, and he was scared that he was going to harm himself and other people. And so he said, I need help. I'm voicing this. And we took him into the hospital, and the hospital said, oh, he's hearing voices, but and the mental health worker, crisis worker, comes in and says, he told me that he's not worried about harming anybody, that he also promised that he wouldn't harm himself or others. And we said, well, he's 16 years old, like he's impulsive, and he's worried about that impulse may strike, and that's when it's going to happen. It's not like it's premeditated. And so we really struggled because they wanted to see somebody for chest pains or a broken leg, or there was a person in there that also they were treating for an overdose. They want to see the physical stuff. And I don't think that it's that they don't take it seriously. I think it's they're not 100% sure what to do in the hospitals because there's a lack of resources. And so anyways, I basically sat down and I plumped my butt down in the chair and I said, look, we're not leaving here until this gets taken seriously. He's got a younger brother at home and he's worried he's going to hurt somebody or himself, and he's hearing voices. And I said, he needs to be seen, he needs to be treated, and he needs to be admitted. And I said, so we're not signing any kind of liability release or self-care plan or non-self-harm plan, because they get you to sign these papers, and they tried to get him to sign them without anybody being present. And, I felt like it was really not, like he wasn't being taken seriously. And like I said, not at the fault of the people who work in the hospital, because, the nurses and the doctors are amazing and they're great at what they do and they care for people, and that's incredible. But I just think that they really didn't know what to do. And especially because it was, a northern rural community, it was very difficult for them to know, like they had to call the mental health crisis team, and then the crisis team had to call the psychiatrist, and then the psychiatrist finally said, okay, admit this 15-year-old boy. And so I think that, we really need to work at, and I was reading an article as well, in many states and provinces in the US, Canada, everywhere and all over the world, people that go into emergency rooms for mental illness are often discharged, and those are the people that are back, and they continue to come back because they continue to struggle. And so sometimes people know that they're struggling mentally, and sometimes they don't. So they go into the hospital. Like when I was panic disorder, I would go into the hospital when I was younger for chest pain, thinking I was having a heart attack. Well, it wasn't a heart attack. It was my panic disorder. And so being a person that's been dismissed in the hospital without things like that being taken seriously, and then having to wait, after you've been there 4 times because you're having chest pains, then waiting for 16 hours, it's just a really frustrating thing. So having been in those shoes before in the emergency room for mental illness, with the lack of resources and education and the lack of the link that we're talking about for mental health and physical health, when the two go hand in hand. I mean, if you're depressed, the first thing I do when I'm depressed is I put on sweats and sit on the couch. So your personal hygiene goes, so your mental health directly affects your physical health, and vice versa. If I'm not feeling well physically, I'm not having a good day mentally either. And I'm sure that you guys, with your diagnoses, see the same thing.
Oh yeah, it's fascinating to me. Physical health is your body, and mental health is your brain. But of course, your brain is in your body. We don't have mental health, physical health, and then a separate stage for heart health, because we understand that the heart is in the body. It's like everything is combined except for the way that we think and feel. And you're right, it absolutely drives everything. People who are depressed are more likely to smoke, they're more likely to overeat, they're less likely to exercise, they're less likely to build sustainable friendships or relationships. So that's a support system. Everything just sort of spirals out of control from these thoughts and feelings that definitely have, a massive impact on our physical safety and surroundings, and potentially, I always like to say potentially, the safety of those around us. And the fact that you knew what you were looking for and came in and said it, and you still had, some pushback, it is obviously something that we want to change. I like how you said, we're not trying to throw people under the bus or blame them. We're just saying that we have to do better.
Exactly. And those nurses and doctors were amazing. And once he was admitted, they were great. But, a lot of times the nurses on the ER, because he was put in the pediatric ward, they are not 100% sure how to handle it. And he had a suicide watch nurse that was at his side 24/7. And they're not entirely sure, what to say to him. They have to either, do the steps of calling the mental health crisis team. Well, they were only in Monday to Friday, 9 to 4. And then the psychiatrist wasn't in until Mondays, and he works Monday to Friday as well. So when you really have an emergency on a Saturday night, essentially that system, like I said, no fault of anybody involved, but that system is you got to be in the hospital for 2 days or get discharged and come back on Monday, or wait 6 months or a year to get referred to a psychiatrist and specialist. So, it's really frustrating being on the other end of that, being the person who's experiencing it for themselves or for a loved one, being able to say, look, I know that this is happening, especially even when I went in, like you said, saying that I know what's happening, still being unintentionally given the dismissive and the runaround. I don't think people were intentionally trying to brush it off. I just think they didn't know what to do with it. So finally, the psychiatrist was called after, 4 hours in emergency.
Well, and I think your experience, too, also speaks to the tragic shortness of psychiatrists that we have right now. And you said it was in a rural area, which just adds to the problem there.
Yeah, and then there's less resources for counseling and stuff in rural areas where people aren't in a main center.
Exactly.
We will see you in a moment after we hear from our sponsor.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp.com. Secure, convenient, and affordable online counseling. All counselors are licensed, accredited professionals. Anything you share is confidential. Schedule secure video or phone sessions, plus chat and text with your therapist whenever you feel it's needed. A month of online therapy often costs less than a single traditional face-to-face session. Go to BetterHelp.com/Psych Central and experience 7 days of free therapy to see if online counseling is right for you. BetterHelp.com/Psych Central.
Welcome back, everyone. We're here with Brett Francis, author of the book Not Broken. So, what are, as you put it, mental illness superpowers?
Well, mental illness superpowers, I actually kind of, came up with that through, building my career and speaking and things like that, where I realized, I can actually use my mental illness to an advantage here. Like, it doesn't have to be always something that cripples me. It doesn't have to be always something that makes me feel like garbage. It doesn't have to be always something that I'm judging myself for, or other people, I feel like other people are judging me for. It doesn't have to be a downfall, and it doesn't have to be, so to speak, a fault that I look at. We all look at ourselves in the mirror and point out our own imperfections. People with mental illness look into their own minds and point out the flaws that they think they have, and they judge themselves for it, and we're our own worst self-critics. And so, a big part of what I do is really embracing that mental illness and figuring out what has it brought to your life. And initially people say to me, like, what? Like, what are you talking about? Like, I live with depression, or I'm chronically depressed. How has that brought any benefit to my life? And one of my friends that has chronic depression, I said to her, think of something that it's brought. Like, who do you think you wouldn't be, or what has it brought to your life? Well, and it took her hours. So she finally calls me back and says, Brett, I'm a paramedic and I care for people for a living, and I don't think that I'd do without depression. And I'm really empathetic, so I'm really in tune as well with other people's feelings, and I can provide empathy. I can be a good wife, and I can really understand where people are coming from and empathize with how they're feeling and also pick up on it. And I said, well, what's not great about that? So for me, one of the first things was, well, if I didn't have OCD, I wouldn't be organized enough to do my own thing. I'd be so scatterbrained. I wouldn't be organized enough to be in business, to run a business, to write books. And not saying I don't struggle with those things and that I don't have bad days, but without the OCD, I wouldn't be a business owner. Without my ADHD, I wouldn't be as creative. Without my anxiety, I wouldn't have the amount of energy that I do and the amount of passion that I do. Without my Tourette syndrome, I wouldn't be who I am or what I am today and doing what I do today. If I hadn't had the past of my bullying, my substance abuse, if I hadn't had all those, don't get me wrong, I wouldn't wish those things on my worst enemy, but those things are what's made me the person that I am today, sharing my story, the person that loves to change people's lives, the person that loves to bring awareness to mental health and fight for the advocacy. I would not be that person had I not had my diagnoses. So that's what mental health superpowers are.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I like the way that you worded it and tried to tie it together. Sometimes I go the other way where I say that, there's no superpower in mental illness. These are just innate skills that a person has that they're able to use. And, when I talk to people that, say, no, I'm turning my mental illness's negatives into positives. On one hand, I want to be like, no, there's no positive about mental illness. But on the other hand, I really appreciate the reframing. And this is why I am so glad that there are multiple voices out there, because the reality is I'm kind of a realist. I'm kind of a pessimistic guy, and that's how I choose to deal with my symptoms and mental illness. But other people are more optimistic and they see things differently, and they're going to completely agree with you. And this is why I feel that all voices are important, because if you were the only voice, you'd never connect to me. And if I was the only voice, I'd never connect to you. But thankfully, multiple voices allows everybody to feel connected, and we're all on the same side. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for sharing as well. And I would say I'm more on the optimist scale of that. However, my anxiety, and I'm sure you guys experience it with your mental health as well, it's almost like a Jekyll and Hyde type thing where 1 minute
oh yes,
I'm an optimist, and in a split second and snap of a finger, I can be the worst pessimist in the world, and all life is going down the drain, and I'm a failure, and it's a waste of time, and blah, blah, blah. You guys know the drill, right? So, it's the snap of a finger, and it can change in a split second. I can be the pessimist.
Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
So I can be Mr. Hyde,
yeah.
And it can just switch in a flash. And it's very frustrating sometimes, but I'm so back and forth, and I yo-yo so much with my mood with anxiety that I know that there's going to be some sort of snap of a flash, and I'm going to be optimist Brett again in like the next millisecond or half an hour or the next day, so I know that that's coming. So that kind of gives me a little bit of hope, because I'm like, well, I know the optimist, resilient, stubborn Brett is in there somewhere, and she's got to come out eventually. Just poke it a little bit,
That is very cool. And I think this is a nice segue into self-stigma, because you talk about self-stigma a lot and the different ways that it affects us. So can you talk about that a little bit?
So, a lot of people really undervalue what they say to themselves. And anxiety and all mental illness is like, it puts those doubts in your head where it's like, I'm a failure, I'm not good enough. And it's continuing to tell you everything that you can't and won't, or should have and could have. My counselor says, focus on the can-dos and the have-dones, but that's not anxiety. So anxiety is like, the angel and the devil sitting on your shoulder. It's like the devil that's there all of the time, just whispering in your ear that you're not good enough. And so that's, a big part of stigma. And sometimes it's easier to control, and at other times it's not easy to control at all. You have this way that you feel you should be. And I think as human beings, naturally, with or without mental illness, we have, that self-critic where we try to make ourselves feel like we should be this, or we should be that, or we should have more money, or we should have a better job, or we should, be married by now, or all these things that we say the should have. We naturally are programmed to think of that as human beings. Like, our society seems to always focus on, I'm not skinny enough, I'm not well off enough. And so we focus on the negatives naturally as a society, throw mental health in the mix, and we're really giving ourselves a hard time. And so it's just this continuing negative Nancy in your head. And so we give ourselves this self-stigma where it's almost turning into a double depression. So I don't know if you guys have that or not, but like when you're depressed, you're like, oh, crud, like, why am I depressed? I shouldn't be depressed right now. So you get depressed about being depressed.
Yeah, guilt.
Right? I get anxiety about having anxiety. I'm like, why am I anxious right now? Like, and then I start to overthink, like, why am I this anxious?
Yep.
So it's an anxiety about having anxiety, depression about having depression, and it's really this spiral. If you don't stop it, it can get out of hand really, really fast. So that's a really big role that my anxiety's tried to, play in my own mental health, is it's tried to give me anxiety about being anxious or feeling depressed about being depressed. And it just really gets us nowhere. And so we also undervalue the self-care in that as well. So we forget to take care of our minds and our bodies while we're going through that.
Yep, sounds about right to me.
Not wrong at all.
Yeah.
Now that you've mentioned self-care, there are misconceptions about self-care out there. Self-care, emotional well-being, all of these things. Can you talk about some of those misconceptions?
I'd say one of the biggest misconceptions about self-care is that it's selfish. We hear this, you can't take care of somebody to the best of your ability until you're taken care of. I mean, why do you think when you go on a plane, the safety demonstration says, put your own air mask on first and then help others? So when you are breathing properly, your brain is more clear, and therefore you can help other people put their mask on, such as children, other people that may need help, somebody that you're with. But as soon as you have that breath of air and you get that oxygen flowing into your body, you're thinking more clearly because you're taken care of. So that's exactly the same reason why they tell you to put that mask on first for yourself and then help others, is because if we don't take care of ourselves, we can't give others our everything. So we can't take care of our spouses, our children, our friends, and be there for them as much as we could be with our own self-care. So we're giving ourselves, or we're, I guess, losing not only the self-care and all of its benefits, but we're also losing possible potential to be something more to somebody else that we love. Another common misconception would be that, I don't need self-care. I'm good. Everybody needs self-care. People with or without mental illness. People with mental illness obviously have to find out, really what works for them. And I mean, that's for everybody. Everybody, it's important that they know what works for them. Another one would be that it's not that important. Well, it really is. And then the one, along with selfish is that, people think I need to take care of everybody else first, and then I can take care of me. And then the last one, I guess, that I would say is the most common is that, it takes a lot of time. Well, no, it actually doesn't. Talking about meditation, you can do that twice a day for 10 minutes. It's literally the amount of time that you would spend, going and freshening up and brushing your hair or something. So you go and you brush your hair. So instead of going to brush your hair, or maybe you need to brush your hair too, spend 5 minutes just meditating and breathing. People really think that it takes, I've got to invest 3 hours a day into going to the gym, eating right, all this stuff. And so people get very overwhelmed because they're like, I have to start with 3 hours of self-care in order to get anywhere. Well, no, it can start with like 5 minutes a day. So people really have that. That's a really big misconception as well. That's how I felt initially when I started reading self-help books when I was, after my miscarriage and my depression and suicide attempts, I started reading books and I went, boy, do I have a lot to do. Like if I want to turn my life around, holy man, like, am I ever going to get there? And sometimes I still feel like that, where I'll go and see my counselor and I'll be like, oh boy, I just wrote down 18 things that I think that I have to do. And so I'll take that back to my counselor the next time and she'll be like, Brett, what are you doing? Like, these are not 18 things you have to do. The stuff we talked about isn't things that you need to check off your list and improve on yourself. There are things that, where we could eventually get to, like, that doesn't need to happen right now. And I'm like, well, I got a plan, and she's like, that's going to take you like half the working day to get done today. And I'm like, okay, right. So let's do the 5 or 10 minute thing. Right. So we all, I think, do that, and you get overwhelmed, like, holy man, do I ever have a lot to work on before my mental health improves? Or do I ever have a lot to work on before I lose weight? And people just think that it's going to be this long, drawn out, tedious task. And it's really not.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right.
Makes sense completely. Brett, the time just flies by. Before we close out the show, can you tell folks where we can find you?
So you can go to my website at mentalhealthspeaks.com. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter. Handle would be @BrettSpeaksNow.
Brett, thank you so much. You were a great guest, and we look forward to having you on the show again. It was absolutely wonderful. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, guys, and also for sharing, your own personal lives with me.
You're very welcome. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And remember, you can get 1 week of free, convenient, affordable, private online counseling anytime, anywhere, just by visiting betterhelp.com/psychcentral. We will see everybody next week.
Thank you for listening to the Psych Central Show. Please rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you found this podcast. We encourage you to share our show on social media and with friends and family. Previous episodes can be found at psychcentral.com/show. Psychcentral.com is the internet's oldest and largest independent mental health website. Psych Central is overseen by Dr. John Grohol, a mental health expert and one of the pioneering leaders in online mental health. Our host, Gabe Howard, is an award-winning writer and speaker who travels nationally. You can find more information on Gabe at gabehoward.com. Our co-host, Vincent M. Wales, is a trained suicide prevention crisis counselor and author of several award-winning speculative fiction novels. You can learn more about Vincent at vincentmwales.com. If you have feedback about the show, please email talkback@psychcentral.com.